So first off, thanks for being here, and I apologize that we're starting a little bit late. I'm Richard Graves. I'm the director of the Center for Sustainable Building Research, and this webinar today is taking a look at Sustainable Building 2030, our program that we do with the state of Minnesota, but also with some municipalities, and we're doing a variety of things. We're kind of looking at we're looking at programs from Xcel Energy, how they integrate with SB 2030, what we're learning from projects that are going after our more aggressive target now of 80% better than typical buildings. And then we're having a session that's sort of forward-looking, thinking about as we create more efficient buildings with SB 2030, how do they interact with the grid, and think about having sort of these smart, efficient buildings that play well with the grid in the future in order things to consider. But before we get started, I want to hand it over to Pat Hamilton from the Science Museum, they've been our host for this event for years and years and years. Even I say our virtual host, even when we're having this program remotely. So let me hand it over to Pat to welcome us and give us a few thoughts to start the day.
Thank you very much, Richard, and good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the Science Museum of Minnesota, welcome to what is the 10th Annual Sustainable Buildings 2030 Symposium. I'm Patrick Hamilton, and I'm the Director of Climate Change, Energy, and the Environment at the Science Museum. Well, I wish we were meeting in person, but I'm delighted that we're meeting virtually rather than not at all, because this work of improving the energy performance and human comfort of the built environment is vitally important, because here's the situation. Never has it been more necessary to act on climate change, and never has it been more possible. 10 years ago, when the first Sustainable Building Symposium took place, global warming was already a scientific reality, but not yet a pressing societal concern. Now in 2022, climate change is a lived experience of everyone, everywhere. Addressing climate change will require an all-of-society approach, but some will have more opportunities to make a difference than others. Such is the case with buildings and those like yourselves who design, develop, construct, and operate them. According to the US Department of Energy, the building sector accounts for 76% of electricity use and 40% of all US primary energy use and associated greenhouse gas emissions, making it essential to reduce energy consumption in buildings in order to meet national energy and environmental challenges and to reduce the cost to building owners and occupants. Opportunities for improved efficiencies are enormous. This symposium every year has revealed impressive innovations that have advanced building energy performance. And the Science Museum of Minnesota exemplifies what is possible. The museum's carbon dioxide emissions peaked at 12,300,000 pounds annually in 2013. But by the end of 2022, this calendar year, I project that the museum's emissions will be down to 880,000 pounds annually, a decline of 93%. This dramatic plunge has been made possible by the museum's own ambitious energy efficiency measures, such as its implementation of advanced heat recovery, and by the successful efforts of the museum's energy suppliers, District Energy St. Paul and Xcel Energy, to decarbonize their energy production. But the museum is not yet at carbon neutrality, which is why it continues to pursue opportunities to showcase new ways to enhance the energy performance of its buildings, and why it strongly supports the efforts of all of you to do so as well. I want to thank Richard Strong, the director of the University of Minnesota Center of Sustainable Building Research, for organizing another stellar lineup of presenters today. He is an outstanding champion for sustainable and resilient urban development in a dynamic world, and it's always a pleasure to work with him on this symposium. So Richard, I hand the virtual floor back to you.
Great, thanks, Pat. Now I'll actually hand it off to Kris Kohls from Xcel Energy to give us an introduction to their programs that relate to SB 2030. Thanks, Kris.
Thanks. It actually says the host has disabled screen sharing.
Okay. Liz, can you make it so we can share screen?
Sorry about that. Yes, you should be able to share now.
Okay, just a second. There we are. Thank you. Thank you again. And yes, I just have a couple minutes to remind everybody that as you're looking towards SB 2030, just remember to engage your utility partners. With Xcel Energy, we have a host of programs for new construction projects. And they include consulting services for our customers, as well as incentives for incorporating some of the energy efficiency ideas identified in the projects. They're both for new construction and additions and major renovations, but pre-approval is required. So we ask that you get us involved, reach out to us before you get too far down the planning path. Just to remind people, the primary two programs that we have are Energy Design Assistance, and that is probably the program that you would want to participate if you are striving for SB 2030, because it involves energy modeling and helps you identify the path to reach SB 2030. But it involves free energy consulting services. We work with real-time energy models to help you optimize and identify the efficiency strategies in your program. And again, then we offer incentives based on what you implement in the building. Our energy efficient buildings program is a little more straightforward. It's typically for smaller buildings or buildings that just are very straightforward. And it's a kind of a streamlined path to identifying opportunities and then receiving rebates for the program. Getting back to energy design assistance, one of the first things that we do when we put together your project is we take a look at the energy use breakdown and the energy cost breakdown in order to help you identify where's the biggest bang for my buck, where can I find the greatest opportunities for energy savings. And that's where we start off and start identifying opportunities. The one thing that we do for all projects in EDA, whether you be pursuing SB 2030 or not, is that we use that as the baseline. And so we show all customers with your new project, how does your project, as you have it planned currently, compare to SB 2030, just to set the tone, even if you're not doing SB 2030. And then it helps you identify, based on the packages of energy efficiency opportunities that you pick, how do they compare to the SB 2030 standard? And then it helps you kind of keep an eye on where do I want to focus, what is my goal? And then as you're going through the development process and might have to go through phases of value engineering, you can kind of use this to keep an eye on what your ultimate goals are. And so with that, I just want to remind you again, please reach out to your utilities, whether it be Xcel Energy or other utilities in your area. We have lots of resources and offerings to help guide you through this process. So, and with that, I think I am turning it over to Crystal, who's going to talk about some of our renewable offerings.
All right. Let me just figure out how to share my screen quick, and then we will be rock and rolling. All right, I'm definitely more familiar with Teams. Would somebody be willing to confirm you can see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it, Crystal. You're good. You're good.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, I suppose. My name is Crystal Pomerleau. I'm the Solar Trade Relations Manager for Xcel Energy for our Minnesota programs. So just to give some background information, Xcel Energy has been known as a trailblazer in energy innovation. We were the first to announce our goal to reach 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. There's a lot of information on our website that dives more into those details. But today we are going to talk about programs that directly influence you in the buildings that you're working in. So I've broken up our agenda into 3 different points. The first is considerations for renewable participation, as your priorities and goals will influence how you want to participate. Next, we'll dive into our certified renewable percentage, and I'll get to what that means. And last but not least, I'll give a brief overview of each of the offerings that Xcel Energy has for renewable programs. So to kick it off, before you dive straight into participating in any renewable program, you definitely want to take into consideration some of the following. What's your motivation? Is it to reduce your carbon footprint, save money, support clean energy, increase renewables, or other? A different way to look at that is key considerations. When you're making the choice of how you want to participate with renewable energy, some things to consider are the location of the offering, whether you pay money or save money, whether your delivery partner is with Xcel Energy directly or with a third-party provider. The length of your commitment, for example, if it's a 25-year contract to a month-to-month contract. And then most importantly is your ability to make renewable energy claims, as I'm assuming a lot of your buildings might have goals to be 100% renewable, and whether you can make renewable energy claims or you keep the renewable energy certificate will be really important. So to give a high level overview of what a renewable energy certificate or a REC is, you can think of it like a golden ticket. It is equivalent to 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy produced. That energy then goes onto the grid, and the REC serves as that proof that that 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy was generated and can be purchased separate from electric service. So who has the ownership of that REC will be very important. So to give some examples, if you own the REC, you'll be able to say things like, we've gone solar, we've reduced our emissions, we've reduced our carbon footprint, the list goes on. However, depending on which program you participate in, you may not own the REC, which means you need to be careful with how you make your claims about renewable energy. And so to give a little bit more background, RECs are not something that Xcel Energy ourselves polices. This is a Federal Trade Commission green guideline. We've included a couple of resources, including the Environmental Protection Agency, where these rules really come from. So Xcel Energy is here to help communicate and answer questions. You can definitely reach out, look on our website, or talk to your account manager if you have any questions. But the source of truth is really the FTC on these. So that's the end of our REC session. If you have any questions, again, there's a lot of resources, and I will review a chart at the end that goes over which programs do or do not include the RECs. But next, we're going to dive into our certified renewable percentage, which really is Xcel Energy's baseline for renewables, which will be important to take into consideration for your sustainability goals. So to dive into the weeds just a tiny bit, the certified renewable percentage is really a reporting structure. It's not a program that you have to participate in. It is Xcel Energy's baseline renewable percentage. So this gives customers a way to count the renewable energy that you already receive as a part of your regular service towards your sustainability goals. So on the right side, we have a little bit of the calculation behind the scenes, as well as our certified renewable percentage forecast throughout 2030. So main point here is that this continues to grow and will influence your participation. In order to make this official, it is a third-party verified item, I guess. It's incorporated into our annual energy and carbon emission report. So you can look up all the juicy details there. And again, no enrollment needed here, just something to consider when you're planning out all of your goals. So with that, we'll dive into a brief overview of each of our renewable energy programs. Again, noting that the certified renewable percentage is really, you're not starting from zero, you're starting from that baseline of the renewable energy already on the grid. So to give a quick overview of our programs, there are 5 offerings. 3 of them are subscription-based, 2 are on-site. We'll go through the subscription-based offerings first, with the first 2 being hosted directly from Xcel Energy. Another way to term these is our green energy purchase options. So the first offering is WindSource. Again, this is directly offered by Xcel Energy. I won't dive into all of the details here, but we will make this PowerPoint available if you have further questions or would like to review this in your free time. WindSource typically is a month-to-month contract. And since you're paying a premium for this product, you do get full REC ownership, meaning you can go ahead and make those renewable energy claims. Quick how to participate. WindSource is very self-service, user-friendly. You can sign up right online, or you can certainly always contact your account or community manager. Participation can begin almost immediately. And on a similar note, Renewable Connect is also an offering directly through Xcel Energy. It's kind of like the big sister to WindSource or WindSource 2.0. However, it does include solar and a mix of other renewables. But the key point being that, again, directly offered by Xcel Energy, you still get the full REC ownership and can make those renewable energy claims. And then Renewable Connect has a little bit more flexible terms. So there's a lot of different pricing offerings and options depending on the length of the contract that you would like to select. All of those information and details are available online. So quick update on the how to participate. Our pilot actually is fully subscribed. However, there is a wait list available. We will have new offerings coming soon, and WindSource will be officially transitioning to Renewable Connect. But again, you can join or sign up for either of those online. All right, and then the last subscription-based model is Solar Rewards Community. Again, just hitting on the main points here, this is actually a third-party offering, not directly offered by Xcel Energy. Your contract for subscribing to Solar Rewards Community would be directly with the garden operator. So very key difference between this subscription-based model. Also, because of the different structure here, Xcel Energy actually gets to keep the RECs for Solar Rewards Community, which means if you subscribe to a community solar garden, even though you're likely saving money on your Xcel Energy bill, you do not get to keep the RECs, which means you have to be very careful with the claims that you make about the energy that you're using and your participation in this subscription. So briefly touching on how this works, we have a subscriber. If you as an Xcel Energy electric customer choose to subscribe, you would subscribe directly with the community solar garden. The community solar garden would sell the energy and the RECs to Xcel Energy, and then Xcel Energy would deliver a bill credit to the subscriber on their Xcel Energy bill. And then the money for that bill credit comes from all of our customers through our appeal clause. So briefly, how to participate. Since this is through a third party, we suggest going online to find a community solar garden that chooses to share their information. And then we have a couple of other links with additional information on the ins and outs of the program, since it is quite complicated. However, we are going to skip right to our on-site solar options, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. So as far as on-site, everything starts with net metering, meaning if you would like to install a solar system or even like a wind turbine on your own property, you would be interconnected with Xcel Energy's grid. You would own your own system, and then you would have the full rights to claim the renewable energy benefits if you just participated in net metering, that give and take back and forth with the electric grid when your system is producing or not. So that's really the baseline for on-site systems. Again, no incentives, you get to keep the RECs here. If you would like to participate, Solar Rewards is our incentivized option that layers on top of net metering. So you still own your own system and all of the other logistics of net metering. However, because the RECs are then kept by Xcel Energy, we give you an incentive in exchange for those RECs. So even though you might have a solar system on your rooftop, if you participate in Solar Rewards Community, it would be important to remember or be careful with how you make those claims about that use of that renewable energy, since Xcel Energy would then keep the RECs. And then last but not least, there is also a offering for a PV demand credit rider, which is kind of like it's an additional option onto net metering. This is only available to demand metered C&I customers or commercial and industrial. It cannot be applied to the incentivized systems under solar rewards, and you do get credits that are equivalent to the demand charges for those customers if you participate. All right, so we just covered a lot, but this is a really good overview of everything. So on the far left, you'll see our standard energy mix, which is our baseline, what our renewable energy percentage would be based at. And then if you have sustainability goals on top of that, you can then participate in any of our 5 programs to add on to that percentage to get you up to whatever your goals might be. Again, keeping in mind the different factors, whether it's the location, who your contract is with, cost savings, and RECs. And if you have any other questions, we are here to help.
And Crystal, we have one question in the Q&A, and then I have one question too. So Shane Stennis in the Q&A asked, I thought net metering had a 1 megawatt cap. Can you confirm there is no limit?
There is a limit, and it is based on your usage. It would be a 120% of your annual usage, since net metering is an option for on-site at the customer's location.
Okay, and then I had one question. You had a chart showing kind of Xcel's renewable energy mix, and and it went up to 44, and then down to 38, and then back up to 44. What's
driving
why?
that?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Let me just scoot on back to that and see if I can.
And that can be a question you can answer later too. So that was one of your first slides, I think.
Let's, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oh, I think you already kicked me off of it. Awesome. Yeah, why don't I follow up with that, since that gets a little bit into the weeds.
Yeah, and I think for some folks in our program, that kind of level of detail is, you know, in terms of predicting, and if you're trying to factor in renewable percentage in the grid with some things you're doing, kind of having a sense of how that might change over time. And I think generally it will increase in Xcel's mix over time, but understanding how resources might come in and out of the grid over time, there could be ups and downs. So thanks, Crystal. That was great. So
right. Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
And now I'll hand it off to Tom to talk about electric transport.
There, I was just having a little difficulty getting myself on camera and sharing. So I will now jump back here quick. And following a similar suit with Crystal, would someone be able to confirm, able to see the slides?
Yes.
Yep, you're good. We can see your presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So again, appreciate the opportunity of being here today. As mentioned, my name is Tom Santori, Senior EV Product Manager with Xcel Energy, with my main focus being the support of our C&I EV infrastructure portfolio. And really excited to be here today to kind of emphasize just the overall excitement that we have right now as a company, and specifically with our electric transportation team. As we say, we are actively paving a path for our customers to increase their access to electric transportation. This really became prominent looking back at August of 2020. And at that time, that is when we announced our EV vision to power 1.5 million electric vehicles by 2030 in our areas. Within that vision, as you can see on this slide, we really look to drive additional results, where EVs are going to make up 20% of all vehicles in our territory at that time. In addition, we're looking at leading to help save customers over $1 billion in fuel costs, while cutting carbon emissions drastically from transportation, as that is another key initiative of ours as a company. So within that vision in place, what are we doing? We are working to bring forth a portfolio of programs and offerings to support our customers and meet their specific electrification goals as it comes to transportation. We are doing this in kind of three folds. We are providing advisory services to truly help educate and guide customers across various segments of residential, multifamily housing, and specifically our C&I commercial base. We are delivering infrastructure and charging equipment options to really help put the necessary equipment in the ground to help support any and all EV charging segments. And we are providing unique rebates and utility rates to help optimize that charging and cut down those upfront costs to be able to electrify. So with all of that said, that really kind of has led us to where we currently stand today with here in Minnesota with a robust portfolio of programs and offerings in the market for, again, our residential, commercial, multifamily housing customers. So when we look at this kind of piece, what we really like to say is we as the utility really are here. We are ready and eager to support our customers wherever they may be along their electrification journey, and excited to be able to work with them at any point. So without going through each and every one of these, we really just highly encourage any and all customers to explore our programs and project offerings at our web pages. More importantly, for any inquiries or additional information, we emphasize for them to reach out to us, to our project team at electricvehicles@xcelenergy.com, where our team is happy and excited and ready to help. So I think I'll wrap that up there and pass it back to Richard.
Great, thanks, Tom. And thanks for the Xcel team being so efficient in your presentations. We picked up the time, most of the time we lost with with our technical glitches. So I appreciate that, and that's really great information for our project teams about solutions and services that can integrate with their projects. So really appreciate that. So now I'll hand it off to Pat Smith, who's leading our panel on SB 2030 80%. What are we learning from those projects? And again, as I put into the chat, as Pat gets up and running, feel free, and Shane Stennis pointed us the way for this. Post your questions as we go in the Q&A, and some of those questions will get kind of answered in the flow of things by the presenters, and what doesn't we can resolve during the Q&A portion of their panel. So.
Yep, and as I go through, we're going through pretty quickly, quite a bit of information. So I'll keep an eye on the chat if there are questions that pop up. Thanks, Richard. Sorry, it took me a second to boot this up. So the agenda for this portion of the program is talk about who we are, the panel we brought forward, and I'll go quickly through some overview of the process of taking a building through SB 2030, and then talk about some of the key points of what we'll be looking for from the review side of things, and what are kind of helpful tips for folks working through the design process. I'll also highlight some resources that have been updated and are available, including some recent trainings that we've got posted on our training site, and then make a couple of keynotes about small buildings, about renewable energy certificates, which, as Kris noted, is an important consideration, and then talk a bit about some emerging technologies and how to integrate those into this design and review process. But to start, I'll let us introduce ourselves as a panel. Dee, would you like to hop in?
Yes. Let me start my video. Hi everyone, this is Dee Sui, and I work with Center for Energy and Environment. I'm the team manager of the CE team. We do reviews since the start of the project, which is like how many years ago? Like almost 7 years ago. yeah, happy to be presenting today and help everyone going through the SB 2030 reviewing project process. Thanks.
Thanks, Dee. Wade?
Hi, everyone. This is Wade Cooper with Willdan. I'm a program manager that works regularly with Xcel Energy and other utilities in Minnesota, working on energy models to help teams achieve their SB 2030 goals.
Great. So just to take a step back, I'd like to just give a very brief primer or refresher in terms of the SB 2030 program. It sits within a larger network of B3 guidelines and SB 2030 offerings, and it's really intended to bring forward an energy target setting process early in the design process, through the design process, and then to pick that up again in operations to make sure that we are targeting these energy and carbon reduction goals and achieving them in operation. The schedule for these increases every 5 years. We started with a 60% reduction in 2010 from a 2003 baseline, and we're asking buildings to achieve at this point a 80% reduction from a 2003 baseline. And so the overall DNA of the program is to hold steady a baseline that's based on a building survey that was done in 2003, and then look at increasing reductions from that move towards a net zero in 2030. We manage this process for design teams through a couple of tools. They are on the left, the B3 guidelines tracking tool, and on the right, the SB 2030 energy standard tool. And I'll talk a bit about where those come into play when I go into the process. But what I'd like to kind of primarily talk about today, and this is a thread that runs through, I think, the 3 of our presentations, is how this integrates into the design process and what some considerations are for those teams that are going to be needing to hit these targets. And so I'm going to break this up into both talking about what the SB 2030 program has in terms of parts, but also how this flows into the design process and what some key touch points are, just to make sure that we're stepping through a design process and actually getting these buildings to the level of performance that's required, but doing so in a way that recognizes how what information is known at different phases of the design. And so I will apologies, I didn't have this pulled up, but I have, as part of this, a flowchart that outlines the steps in the process, and I'll post a link in the chat to the PDF of that in just a moment. But I want to just talk first about the breadth of things that can be brought to bear to meet SB 2030 target. And when we moved to this 80% reduction in 2020, we looked at a broader set of resources that we had allowed teams to bring forward to meet this target, because 80% is a significant reduction, and it represents a high level of performance requirements. So projects, and I'll talk about the process of this in a second. Projects can look at both energy efficiency and on-site renewables as a way to meet their 2030 targets. And then if they document constraints relative to what's available with energy efficient technology or available on-site resources, they can then look off-site for the remainder of their need or of their energy demand to hit that target. And so on the graph is on the right here is a diagram of how that breaks out, but this is a little bit more of a broad look about what we're seeing in the program right now. We've got a significant reduction, from the 2003 average, getting us 80% better building. And then project teams bring forward energy efficiency measures, better than code, looking at on-site renewables. We then, if they document a significant constraint, can set an on-site target for those teams. Then they would need to satisfy the remainder with offsite resources. And these are either in portfolio renewable energy, the IPRE labeled here, or using renewable energy certificates. This is the overall kind of basket of things that teams can bring forward to meet SB 2030. But then there's a question about, okay, well, how do we actually integrate this into the design process? And so this image here is basically the flow chart of a project's path through the program. And this is broken out into both the project team and the SB 2030 review team portions of this. And I'm going to just go and zoom into a couple of different areas of this to talk through what these measures are. You'll see the pre-design phase that is suggested that the project team should set their energy target, basically get their energy budget sorted out. And so that's this portion. So you're inputting your building information into the energy standard tool. You're telling us what your project is going to be doing. Is it a lab? Is it a airline? Is it a airplane hangar? Is it a higher education building? We need to know that so we can set an appropriate energy target for your project. Right, and this sets the SB 2030 energy standard. And so this is done through that energy standard tool that I mentioned earlier, and this takes that basically programmatic building information and establishes a target for it by taking a reduction from that 2003 baseline. So this produces the project's energy budget. Stepping forward from this, apologies, my slide deck is kind of slow. Okay, yep. So then the question is, with the design, when you're comparing the project's design to this 2030 energy standard, the question is, okay, do you meet your energy target? Are you achieving significant reductions? Are you achieving reductions kind of according to this increasing reduction schedule? And if you are, then that's step forward, proceed, and we'll receive documentation of that and review it and confirm that you are indeed hitting your target. If you're not putting forward a design that meets the target, then the question is, do you have are there options available for you that fit within what we consider to be cost effective that would or that could be used to meet your target, that could be used to achieve that 80% reduction? If yes, then the request is to implement those into the design. If no, then we will we open up the option to look offsite for additional resources. One piece of this that we understand is an important consideration is that there is a limit to the cost-effective efficiency measures, and this does vary building by building. Some buildings have a broader opportunity to bring forward energy conservation measures or ECMs in order to hit an 80% target. Others just have a smaller opportunity to do so. And so we wanted to craft a program here that takes that into consideration and implements a cost-effective limit to the program. We are currently using a 12-year simple payback as our cost-effective, as a determinant as to whether a measure can be considered cost-effective or not. And that's based on kind of some in-depth research and some in-depth calculation, but it's useful in terms of measures that a project team can evaluate relative to that window, to that payback analysis. So if you've documented, or if you can document that you've hit upon a cost-effective constraint, essentially that there's not cost-effective options in order to hit your 2030 target, then that opens up essentially a review of what is being considered by the design team. We, as the review group, may step in and ask for additional strategies to be evaluated. Once all that gets sorted out, and we have a confidence that the design team is accurately documenting that they've hit this cost-effective bound, that gets memorialized in a on-site target memo, where we recognize the project team has a certain on-site versus off-site obligations. And what you're seeing here is that kind of piece of information that we really want to see ironed out early in the design process to make sure that everybody's on the same page with what the project needs to put forward to meet 2030. So this is where you would identify what you need to meet on-site versus what you need to meet off-site. And this is noted as preliminary. This gets tuned as the project moves forward, but it is a good touch point to note this is what the set of stuff the project is going to use to meet 2030. And then once you've established your on-site target, then the question is, okay, well, what off-site resources should be brought to bear? One piece that we've put forward is a hierarchy of renewables that we request project teams to work through in a specific order, looking first with on-site renewables, which would go into this on-site target setting, and then looking at in portfolio second, and then as a third option, looking at renewable energy certificates. So looking at on-site as being primary, and then secondary as in portfolio, and tertiary as the renewable energy certificates. And this is aligned with the Renewable Energy Lab's hierarchy of renewable energy options. We massaged it a little bit to take into account projects that might have a campus resource or other kind of larger area to work off of, because we work with counties and other entities that have large areas of connected property. And so this is the NREL scheme here, and this is how we've used that to note preferred versus less preferred renewable options. So the short of this is that there are different, once project teams can prove out that they've hit constraints, there are different patterns of how projects are going to meet SB 2030. The one in the upper left is if you can just meet that with energy efficiency measures alone. 80%'s a pretty heavy lift for just efficiency measures, but you could think of like a passive house level of performance as being similar to this 2030 target. Below that, bottom left, if you've got on-site resource availability and you can use that to offset what you are not getting with energy efficiency, that's another path to meeting SB 2030. Again, you would need to document that you've hit a cost-effective constraint to move off-site, but the upper right shows if you've got on-site and off-site renewables that you're bringing to bear to fully meet the target. And the bottom right shows if you've got a shaded site or you've got other constraints on the site that make cost-effective on-site renewables not an option, then you're looking at doing this with off-site measures. We'll take questions at the end, but I'll also pause quickly if there's any questions on what I've gone through so far. I don't see any in the Q&A panel. Okay, seeing none, I'll hand it off to Dee to talk a bit about from the review side what we're looking for.
I'm actually jumping in here first, Pat.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I'll tell you when to advance the slide here. Thanks, Pat, for the lead up. I'm going to talk just briefly about how some of that review process aligns with the model timing and your design. So the main point is to get registered as soon as possible. So generally you're looking at pre-design schematic design phase, getting registered on the B3 site. And that's when you calculate your initial SB 2030 standard value with the tool on the website. Then once you kind of get a little bit further into SD phase, you're looking at multiple systems in most cases. And in terms of the program itself and looking for maximizing energy efficiency measures on site, an evaluation of HVAC system options and pricing should be done at that time to determine what is the best selected system to proceed forward with, as well as the most cost-effective option to meet the 12-year payback. That's a requirement of the program. Next slide. So as you go from SD into DD, by this point, you should have established your HVAC system that you're moving forward with. This will make some of the other decision making and review process simpler. We'll also be looking to recalculate the SB 2030 standard at that time. Sometimes design changes, sizing a building will come into play. You use the tool again during the design phase of the SB 2030 program to calculate that value once again. Now would be the time to start analyzing and digging deeper into individual energy efficiency measures to help reduce that design EUI. This would include items like improved ERs, COPs for mechanical, envelope, glazing, lighting, equipment, etc. Also at this time, you should be also considering calculating your on-site renewables and looking at pricing for that for cost effectiveness and how that can be applied for reducing your overall EUI. And given some of the examples that Pat gave, one of the things that I'm going to talk through on the next slide here is what if your current design does not meet the standard? And Pat had indicated that 80% is a pretty heavy lift. So then the timing during this DD phase would be to calculate that on-site target. So we'd be looking at all energy efficiency strategies that are viable and have a 12-year or less payback. That's how we calculate the on-site target. It would also need approval from the review team at that time. And then we would have established the 3 different EUI values in the blue bar chart below. So we'd know the SB 2030 standard, We'd know currently where the design UI is and what you might need for on-site renewables, and then also that on-site target goal. And then you can make up the rest with RECs moving forward. So I'm going to pass it on to Dee now to talk about some of the items that the review team will be looking at these different stages.
Thank you, Wade. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about what the reviewers are looking for in different phases. Reviewers are involved in 3 phases: the D phase, FD phase, and the operation phase. We're gonna take a quick look at the overview of each phase, and we'll go into details later. At D phase, Pat, can you go back to that first? Yeah, sure. So at D phase, which includes SD and DD phase, but timeline wise, it's at the DD phase for the project. So since it's only early design, our target is to make sure that the SB 2030 standard is set up in the Energy Center tool with all the available building information, and to see if there's any potential design updates that can be applied for better building energy performance. And then in FD phase, our goal is to check if the SB 2030 standard are set up correctly and if the design UIs are set up and calculated correctly. And then there's also the operation phase, which would check if the building actual energy use meets the standard. This phase is not a priority. We're not checking all the buildings in this phase as well. Moving on to the next slide. So here we're going to talk about the documents needed for D phase. Projects need to set up SB 2030 standard in the Energy Center tool first, and need to provide basis of design or other available design documents so that we can do an initial check on the Energy Center tool inputs. We also use the basis of design to help check if there's any potential design updates to include for better energy performance. And if projects don't think that they can meet the SB 2030 standard current design, this is when the project move to the on-site target path. So as Wade and Pat mentioned before, we need to estimate the building design energy use, which requires simulation documents to justify that estimation. And then we need to set the on-site target. So the project team needs to provide a strategy list and the cost effectiveness analysis. And the reviewers will work together with the project to come up with this 12-year payback bundle, which determines the on-site target. And after that, project team will need to provide on-site and off-site renewable procurement plan to bring the energy use down to meet the SB 2030 standard. The renewable procurement documents might not be available at this phase, but then we're gonna check them and confirm them in the FD phase. Move on to the next slide. We're going to talk about the documents needed in the FD phase. So if in the D phase, the project teams think that they can meet the SB 2030 standard, here's where we do the detailed review of their design and simulation to confirm that. And those projects are what we called following the performance path. So we do a full review of the Energy Center tool and the simulation to make sure that all the inputs are consistent between the tools, and also if they match with the design. And then the project team needs to provide full sets of construction documents at this phase, the drawings and specs. Below we listed are some common items that folks missed all the time, especially the envelope thermal performance. If sometimes they're not included in either the drawings or the specifications, then the project team needs to provide additional submittals or cut sheets to include those information. And the project team also need to provide simulation documents. We have a building performance evaluation guide that lists all the required documents for different simulation software. You can find the guide on the SB 2030 website. And so for simulation, you can either provide the reports or just the simulation project file. And moving on to the next slide. If you're following the on-site targets, within the D phase. Here's where we double check that the design EUI are calculated correctly. And if you added any new energy efficiency measure when you set up the on-site targets, we're confirming that you do have them included in the full design. So project teams have to provide the full construction documents and the updated simulation documents, which is same as the performance path. We also confirm the on-site and off-site renewable procurement here in the FD phase for those on-site target path projects. Moving on to the next slide, we have a special path for small buildings that have size of less than 20,000 square feet. We'll talk about how to follow this path later, but what we need for the reviews here are pretty similar to other paths. Project team needs to set up the energy center tool based on the design and need to provide full design documents and need to identify a building performance standard that they want to follow. There's no simulation required in this path, for this path. Move on to the next slide. We're going to talk about the final operation phase. We basically just check if the meter data are all entered in the benchmarking tool at this phase and use the data to confirm if the energy use meets the SB 2030 standard. And as I said before, this phase is not a priority. So projects normally don't have to provide any documents for review. But if there are significant changes to building operation schedules that might have a huge impact on the standard EUI, project teams may need to provide additional information on that. And I think that is the last slide of that section. I'll move back to Pat.
Thanks, and I'll pick up a couple of questions that have come up, both in the chat and in the Q&A. One was if a 12-year payback is a requirement. To be very clear, that 12-year is essentially the farthest that we can push a project team in terms of efficiency, in terms of cost effectiveness. You can feel free to do farther payback or longer payback options. That's great. We'd love to see it. But we have essentially a constraint in our program that we can't ask folks to do things that aren't considered to be cost effective based on a bunch of very specific inputs that we proxy by this 12-year payback. So feel free to look at more aggressive strategies, understanding that a lot of owners might want to push harder on that. It's a great question. Thank you for highlighting that. That I was imprecise in describing that. The other question was, what if your project budget doesn't allow for efficiency measures or sufficient renewables? I think that's just to highlight. It's really essential to have what project teams are going to need to put forward to hit these targets in the budgeting process, because there's not a way to kind of wave your hands and pass over some of the potentially cost-effective options in order to meet SB 2030. So to the extent feasible, we love to see project teams coming in really early, and even at a pre-design phase, figuring out what they're going to need to bring to bear to meet their 2030 target. We suggest the project teams actually set their energy standard at the pre-design phase when they've got a programmatic understanding about what their projects are going to be, so that these discussions around what are you going to need to bring to bear to offset that energy, that building's demand, so we can sort out what that looks like, so that it can make it into budgets and make it into everybody's common understanding about what needs to be put forward to actually hit SB 2030. Okay, I'll highlight here, we're kind of wrapping up our last 10 or so minutes, that we've got some training resources available on our training and education site, including recently some whole building lifecycle assessment, and that's more related to the B3 guidelines side of the program. We have an hour-plus session on renewable energy options, including a discussion about renewable energy credits, green power procurement, and more. So this is really piggybacking on what Crystal discussed earlier, where renewable energy certificates are a really essential thing to keep in mind as you're looking at both on-site and off-site solar. One note I'll make, but I'll highlight here, is that if you are using renewable energy to contribute to hitting your 2030 target, it does need to have the RECs associated with it and retired on behalf of the project or replaced by other RECs. You can't sell your RECs to Xcel and then also count them towards meeting your 2030 target. And then I'll hand it back to Dee to go through a bit about the small buildings path, because we think it's useful to highlight, you know, the streamlined approach we have for smaller buildings that you know, may find some of the simulation documentation a little bit more of a heavy lift. And there's a more in-depth training on this available at that training site as well. So this is a highlight from that.
Thanks, Pat. So here we're gonna talk a little bit more about the small building method. So the goal for the small building method is to help the projects go through the review process more quickly. So we provide an option for those buildings to follow the prescriptive path and help them estimate the design energy use so that they don't have to do a simulation. And going on to the next slide. We're going to talk about the applicability. If your project, no matter it's new, renovation, or addition, has a size less than 20,000 square feet, you're allowed to follow this path. And next slide. This method includes 5 steps, which is pretty much the same with the previous ones. At first, we set a target, and then here comes the difference. We have to implement energy efficiency measures, which is to follow all the prescriptive requirements, and then to estimate the energy use, and then to calculate the required renewables, first on-site and then off-site. So first step, same as all the other paths, we need to set up the SB 2030 standard in the energy standard tool. And next slide, implement energy efficiency measures. The project needs to follow all prescriptive requirements of one selected building performance standard. We have all the available standards listed below. The project team will choose one themselves based on the building type, and we have 4 for commercial and 2 for residential. Next slide. The project also needs to meet the mandatory efficiency requirements. This contains 2 parts. First part is Energy Star applicable equipment. So basically, the design needs to use Energy Star rated equipment for any application that has Energy Star rated equipment available. Below is a list of the common appliances and equipment that needs to be Energy Star rated. And next slide, this slide shows the second part of the mandatory requirements, and it's about water fixtures. So the flow rates of the listed plumbing fixtures can exceed certain limits. And we have requirements on 3 types. Going on to the next slide. After meeting all of those prescriptive requirements, we need to estimate the design energy use of the building based on the standard selected. And here we're using a factor called the building performance multiplier. So I'm going to explain it a little bit more. For each standard, we did simulation with reference building models and compare the energy use against the SB 2030 standard to get this multiplier. For example, a typical office building that meets ASHRAE 90.1 has a EUI of 31 kBTU per square feet. And in the energy standard tool, the SB 2030 standard is 19. So the building performance multiplier is 31 divided by 19, which is 1.6. This means that if your project is a small building that follows ASHRAE 90.1, then you can estimate your energy use simply by applying the multiplier of 1.6 to the SB 2030 standard calculated in the energy standard tool. And yes, we can go to the next slide. With the reference building models, we calculate the multiplier for different standards and for the different building types. So the project team can just refer to this lookup table to estimate their design energy use. And going on to the next slide. After we get the estimated energy use, the final step of the small building method is to determine the renewable energy needs. This is a simple calculation of the difference between the estimated energy use and the SB 2030 standard. And if on-site renewable fill the gap, the project team can procure additional off-site renewables to bring the energy use down to meet the SB 2030 target value. And I believe this is the last slide for small building method, and going back to Pat.
Thanks, Dee. I posted in the chat the document, the PDF that outlines this process. It's noted as a draft because we've not filled out a couple of the detailed areas, but it's usable currently for project teams that are working through the program. The question came from the chat about how the small building approach changes with building types that aren't listed or more challenging to predict, or those that we have not modeled. We have to work through those on a case-by-case basis. We'd look for a close proxy if it's available to apply, our best estimate about what that building multiplier would be. But I'll also note that part of the overall team effort over these past program years is to also develop and make available a set of modeling resources that project teams could go and really engage with determining what efficiency measures they need to put forward to meet SB 2030, or and as part of that we have an embedded energy modeler as part of the energy standard tool, which is available to projects that are participating in the program, and that can answer some of those questions around, to what extent are you, or how close is your project to meeting SB 2030, and then what are the value, or what are the performance implications of different available strategies. And so hopefully that at some point or some way answers your question, Leighton. But it's a good question. We do understand that we're focusing on those buildings that we're going to see a lot of, but if there are ones outside of that, we can work through those and determine if there's a reasonable proxy in what we've already modeled, or if we need to go a little bit outfield. Great. I'll talk a little bit about REC considerations. There is again an in-depth training on this, or in-depth session on this. But the first one is that we need to see, because the SB 2030 program was built around a 10-year tracking ask, that we ask for 10 years of the renewable energy certificates for the project to be obtained. So if you don't quite make it there on site, you need to move to a REC or a green power purchase to make it the remainder of the way there to your 2030 target. That's a period of 10 years. You'll need to do that. We've seen projects come forward and do that whole 10-year renewable energy certificate procurement upfront. We've also seen those that are looking to associate their buildings with either ongoing REC procurement, or with RECs as part of Renewable Connector and other, or previously wind source, and both of those options are available. We just need to see those RECs as offsetting that energy demand sufficient to be able to meet your 2030 target. And then they can be split. They can be, you can buy a renewable energy certificate separate from your energy, or you can buy them combined as one of the programs that Crystal noted earlier, if you're in Xcel territory. And then for the RECs, we've got some constraints from some legislation about what we look for in terms of where that energy can come from. Yep, and I'll just note, I think I covered all these, that there's different options for that offsite, that renewable energy certificate piece of things. Then I'll hand it back to Wade for a last note.
Just to wrap up, something to think about in terms of the analysis that goes into play with your particular project. It's the goal of the design team and reviewers to implement as many emerging technologies or opportunities for the greatest amount of savings. But when we're considering those emerging technologies, there's sometimes those that cannot be defined within the energy standard tool. And doing that analysis early on is critical in order to get as much credit as possible to be applied to your project. Credit can be given in a lot of those cases, but most often than not, some of them might need calculations outside the energy model. So just needing and applying extra time to do that review is important, so that you can claim the most amount of savings possible. Some examples just of that would be like hybrid mechanical systems, some complicated heat reclaim strategies, thermal energy storage are things that aren't typically built into the energy modeling tool. And then also consideration for non-typical building types, specialty labs that have higher airflows than the norm, large refrigeration systems. These might need that extra review time. and a little bit extra review to calculate the on-site target. So just be sure, again, a reminder from a timing perspective to get the project set up on the site as soon as possible and start the analysis process as quickly as you can.
Thanks, Wade. One more question that came in the chat was what we're seeing in terms of payback periods for site installed solar. So those, we're seeing those on both sides of that cost-effective bound. So one note to make is, especially if you've got a larger project and it's going to have a larger, somewhat more cost-effective size array, to not assume that you can pass over the on-site renewable as an element of an SB 2030 project, because we are seeing that projects scattered around that boundary right now. Some are penciling out as over, and some are coming in a bit under that threshold, and some are comfortably outside of that window, but that's more on the smaller side of things. And then I'll hold for other questions that are coming in. I don't see any that I've missed so far in the chat or in the Q&A.
And Pat, I've got a question, if there isn't one in Q&A or in the chat. So the 80% better projects, we know somewhere along the line is sort of the cost-effective limit of energy efficiency, and then beyond that, it's now fine, bringing in renewables to make up that next difference. And then in a few years, when we go from 80 to 90, we think that all of the difference between 80 and 90 is just adding more renewables. We're well beyond cost. So of the projects that you've seen so far going after 80%, how many of those is the team seeing that they're past that point of cost-effective energy efficiency and starting to do renewables? I don't know if that question makes sense.
No, it does. So there's some projects that are more constrained, that are looking at efficiency measures, looking at on-site renewables, and then looking at off-site and hitting that 12-year mark. And it really depends on the building type. There's others that and there's some county projects that have come in with this kind of grouping, and that is if you've got ability to implement a larger array or upsize a larger array somewhere else in your campus, then the question is the sizing of that portion of the PV and the building, and looking at, okay, well, at what point does it make sense to just upsize the array a bit rather than pursuing an additional energy strategy with keeping the overall impact of that, or the overall SB 2030 standard being still met, but looking at, okay, when do you switch over from efficiency to solar? But that's when you have the larger system that's available as that offsetting resource. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great.
There's a question about whether it's possible to extend the 12-year to a 15-year. Again, 12-year for us is the minimum. If project teams come in and are pursuing more and more aggressive strategies, that well fits within our what we can ask for in the program. But we have a little bit of a governor in terms of how far we can push teams in terms of that type of cost-effective test. But yes, 15-year, 20-year paybacks, we like to see those come in, and those what those end up doing is lowering the amount of offsite resources you may need to bring in.
One thing we probably should tell everyone on the webinar that we used to have a 15-year payback. Then we kind of CE redid the study on in terms of what was cost effectiveness from the grid, consumer, et cetera. That then lowered, given new qualities of the grid, new costs, lowered us down to the 12-year payback. But just as sort of a reminder that periodically we're thinking every 3 or 5 years, or if there's significant changes in kind of the grid, renewables or costs or other things, or new legislation, we would redo those calculations because it's becoming that cost-effective calculation, now that we're at the 80% level, is really driving a lot of decisions at the project level. So it's important to have the you know, we don't want to update it like every day or every year, but periodically it's something we feel we should revisit. So.
There's a question in the chat about whether you offset the amount of RECs that you need to procure based on the essentially the amount of green power that's already in the grid. That amount of green power that's in the grid actually goes into the 12-year calculation, and so you can't again count it towards the offsetting RECs. It's actually part of why we moved from a 15-year to a 12-year window, was because the grid is essentially more efficient. So no, we don't let project teams take that into account when they're figuring out how many RECs they need to purchase to make it the remainder of the way to their target. But it's a good question.
Okay, well, I'm going to post in the chat your email address, Pat, and my email address. So if people have additional SB20, these are great, really good questions, kind of in the details of the program, as we're learning more of this more aggressive level of 80% projects. So additional questions, project-based questions, or kind of high-level questions like some of the ones we've had during this session, you know, feel free to email Pat or I those questions. So
yes, please do.
Great, thanks Pat, thanks Wade, thanks Dee. Great panel. So